As the last rays of sunlight slid behind the towering trees, we gathered around the flickering campfire, the warmth a stark contrast to the encroaching chill of the forest night. The crackling firelight danced in our eyes, and shadows stretched long across the ground, swallowing the edges of our campsite in an embrace of darkness. It was a weekend to escape reality, a chance to bond over shared laughs and the thrill of the wild, but as I looked around at my friends, Megan, Danny, and Sam, I sensed an undercurrent of unease, a whisper of something lurking just beyond the perimeter of our firelight. "Who wants to start?" I asked, my voice a bit too cheery, an attempt to mask the growing tension. The only answer was the rustling of leaves, punctuated by the distant hoot of an owl. "I'll go," Megan said, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "I have the perfect story." She leaned in closer, the fire casting a halo around her. "This is about the spirit of a woman who roams these very woods, seeking revenge for a wrong done to her long ago." We fell silent, the atmosphere thickening as she spun her tale. "They say she appears on nights like this, when the moon is full and the air is thick with the scent of pine. Campers who dare to mock her or speak her name will hear strange noises, whispers, laughter, and the flickering of lights that lead them deeper into the woods." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Some have even claimed to see her, a shadowy figure with hollow eyes, watching from the tree line." Danny chuckled nervously, but I could tell he was on edge. "You're kidding, right?" "That's just an old wives' tale," he said, his bravado failing to mask the tremor in his voice. Megan smiled, unperturbed. That's what they thought too. Until one night, a group of campers heard a laugh that echoed through the trees, and they followed it, thinking it was just a joke. But it wasn't long before they realized they weren't alone. The noises became louder, the lights flickered, then they vanished without a trace. A gust of wind rustled the branches overhead, and I shivered involuntarily. "Sounds like something straight out of a horror movie," I said, trying to lighten the mood, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Just then, a low rustle came from the darkness beyond our firelight. We all froze, eyes darting toward the source of the sound. "Probably just a deer," Sam said, though his voice betrayed his uncertainty. "Or a raccoon," Danny added, but his eyes remained glued to the shadows. The fire crackled louder as if responding to our tension. Megan continued, her voice gaining momentum. "And when the campers finally turned to leave, they found that the path back had changed. The trees closed in, and the way out became a twisted maze. One by one, they heard her voice, sweet and luring, calling to them until they succumbed to the darkness." "What happened to them?" I asked, half dreading the answer. "They say they are still out there, wandering the woods, trapped between worlds. And on certain nights, you can hear their whispers carried by the wind, begging for help." A tense silence enveloped us as the fire crackled, and the shadows danced ominously. Just as the mood hung thick in the air, a sharp snap echoed from the woods. "What was that?" I exclaimed, jumping slightly, my heart racing. "Relax, it's just the forest settling," Danny said, but he couldn't hide the worry etched on his face. But I wasn't convinced. The air was charged, electric with an unseen presence. The once welcoming embrace of the forest felt stifling, as if the trees were leaning closer, listening to our conversation. I could almost sense the spirit lurking, waiting for an invitation to join our gathering. Megan, sensing our growing fear, smirked. "Maybe she's just waiting for us to say her name." "Don't say it," I blurted out, the anxiety spilling over. "Why not?" "It's just a story." Megan laughed, but her bravado was starting to falter as the wind picked up again, howling through the trees. Then, as if in response to our unease, the fire flickered violently. The flames sputtered, and a shadow flitted at the edge of the trees, just out of reach of the firelight. My heart sank. I glanced at my friends, their faces pale, eyes wide. "Guys," I began, my voice barely above a whisper. "Did you see that?" "See what?" Danny asked, his bravado fading fast. "That shadow." I pointed, but the trees stood silent, the darkness swallowing whatever had been lurking there. "Probably just our imaginations," Sam said, though his voice quivered. Megan shook her head. "No, it's not just the stories. There's something out here. I can feel it." A sudden chill swept through the clearing, snuffing out the warmth of the fire. It felt as though the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for us to act, to make the next move. The wind howled again, and a chorus of whispers seemed to rise from the underbrush, indistinct yet eerily familiar. "What if it's true?" I murmured, the thought planting a seed of dread deep in my gut. What if we're not alone out here? Suddenly, a loud thud echoed through the trees, and we all jumped. "Okay, that one I didn't like," Danny admitted, his bravado crumbling. "Let's just ignore it," I suggested, but as I spoke, the whispers grew louder, circling us, each hushed voice weaving together in a chilling melody. The fire crackled furiously, the flames licking higher into the night as if desperate to fend off the encroaching darkness. I felt a chill creeping up my spine. What if we're in her territory? I whispered, the idea suddenly feeling far too real. Megan's expression turned serious. "We should stop talking about it," she said, but it was too late. The air felt heavy, oppressive, and it was clear that whatever spirit lurked in the woods was listening, waiting for the right moment to strike. As we exchanged nervous glances, the fire flickered once more, illuminating the trees that surrounded us. I couldn't shake the feeling that the woods were closing in, that something was waiting for us just beyond the flickering light of our campfire. And as the stories continued to flow, so too did the sense of dread, pulling tighter and tighter around us, just like the night itself. Little did we know that our night was only beginning, and the shadows that danced just out of reach would soon come to life. The woods were alive, and they had been listening. After Megan finished her story, the atmosphere hung heavy with a mix of trepidation and thrill. The shadows seemed to stretch and shift around us, whispering secrets of their own. As the fire crackled and popped, I suggested we take a little walk around the campsite to shake off the lingering unease. "Come on, let's explore. We can't let a silly story ruin our fun," I declared, my voice too bright against the gloom. "Sure, why not? Let's go check out those woods," Danny replied, his bravado a thin veil over the slight tremor in his voice. "Just remember, no wandering off too far," Megan cautioned, glancing at the dark tree line. "Those stories might not be just stories after all." Sam chuckled nervously as we stood up and began to make our way into the shadows. The moon shone brightly overhead, illuminating our path as we ventured deeper into the woods. The trees stood tall, their branches creaking like old bones as the wind whispered through them. As we walked, we stumbled upon an old, withered sign half hidden by thick underbrush. The paint had long since faded, but the warning was still legible. "Danger, enter at your own risk. Strange occurrences reported." "Wow, this is ominous," I laughed, trying to lighten the mood, though I could feel my heart quickening in my chest. "Is this for real?" "Looks like an old joke someone left behind," Danny said, rolling his eyes as he brushed past the sign. "Come on, it's just a silly warning." "But what if it's true?" Megan whispered, her eyes scanning the darkness around us. The weight of her earlier story seemed to settle over us like a heavy fog. I could feel the echoes of her words creeping into my thoughts, casting shadows over my mind. "Relax, it's just a sign," Sam chimed in, but his voice was tinged with uncertainty. We stood there for a moment too long, the air thick with an uneasy silence. Then, we turned to head back toward the warmth of the fire, laughter trailing behind us like a fading echo. As we approached the campsite, the fire's glow felt like a sanctuary against the encroaching darkness. We settled back around the flames, but the earlier mirth had dimmed. Just as I thought we might shake off the tension, a chilling whisper threaded through the air, barely audible but unmistakably present. "Did you hear that?" I asked, glancing around at my friends. Their expressions mirrored my own, confusion mixed with fear. "What?" Danny asked, leaning in closer. "Whispers, like someone is talking just outside the firelight," I said, my voice low. Megan's eyes widened, and she nodded slowly. "It's probably just the wind," she suggested, but the uncertainty in her voice betrayed her. The whispers grew clearer, echoing the chilling details of Megan's earlier story. It felt as if the very trees were recounting the tale, each rustle of leaves a mocking echo of the vengeful spirit she had described. The atmosphere thickened, and my heart began to race. "Guys, this isn't funny," I said, glancing nervously at the darkness just beyond our camp. What if something is really out there? Enough with the ghost stories." Danny scoffed, but even he couldn't completely hide the quaver in his voice. "Maybe we should check it out," Sam suggested, standing up as if the courage of his words would shield him from the unknown. "I'll go take a look. It's probably just some wildlife or the wind." "No way!" I shot back. "You can't just go wandering off alone. What if it really is something?" "Guys, it's just a sound," Sam insisted, but I could see the resolve fading in his eyes. "I'll be right back. Just stay put and keep the fire going." Before I could argue, he stepped away from the light, moving toward the tree line. We watched, a mixture of fear and helplessness flooding over us as he ventured into the dark. The fire crackled ominously behind us, the flames dancing erratically as if in response to the tension hanging in the air. The whispers intensified as Sam faded into the shadows, now indistinguishable from the soft rustle of leaves and the distant hoots of owls. "I don't like this," Megan said, her voice trembling. "He shouldn't have gone alone." Moments passed, stretching into an eternity. The darkness swallowed any semblance of sound except for the pulsing thrum of my heart. Then, as if conjured by our collective anxiety, a loud snap echoed through the woods, followed by a low moan that sent chills racing down my spine. "Sam!" I shouted, my voice breaking the fragile silence. There was no response, just the creeping whisper of the wind. Megan and Danny exchanged glances, fear evident in their wide eyes. "We should go find him," Danny urged, rising to his feet, but I grabbed his arm, my instincts screaming at me to stay put. "No, we can't go out there. It's too dangerous." "What if it's true?" I said, my voice a frantic whisper. Just as I spoke, Sam's voice broke through the darkness, thin and trembling. "Guys, you need to come here. Now." The urgency in his tone propelled us into action. We stood, hearts pounding, and made our way toward the sound of his voice. As we pushed past the trees, the underbrush crunched beneath our feet, and the air felt charged with tension. "Sam," I called, but the only answer was the rustle of leaves in the wind, echoing the whispers we had heard earlier. Finally, we reached a small clearing illuminated by the pale moonlight. Sam stood at the edge, his expression a mix of shock and horror. "Look," he shouted, pointing towards something on the ground. We gathered around, and my stomach dropped at the sight before us. Scattered on the forest floor were remnants of torn clothing, frayed edges, and stains that looked disturbingly fresh. "What the hell is this?" Danny whispered, a sense of dread washing over him. "I don't know," Sam said, his voice trembling. "But I followed the sound, and it led me here. I thought I saw something move." Before we could digest the implications of what we were seeing, the air around us thickened, and the whispers returned, rising to a cacophony of voices, echoing our own fears and regrets. "Run," I thought I heard them say, but they melted into the rustling leaves, mingling with the wind. "We need to go back to camp, now," I urged, my heart pounding wildly. The earlier bravado had evaporated, replaced by a visceral fear that clawed at my insides. But just as we turned to leave, a low growl emanated from the darkness behind us, followed by a flickering light that danced between the trees. It was as if the forest itself had awakened, its secrets eager to spill into the open. "Did you see that?" Megan gasped, pointing toward the movement that slipped through the underbrush, just out of reach. We stood frozen, hearts racing, as the whispers crescendoed, swirling around us like a tempest. The stories had come to life, and now we were trapped in a narrative we had unwittingly penned ourselves. "We need to run," I shouted, adrenaline surging through me. Without waiting for another word, we turned and sprinted back toward the campfire, the echoes of the night chasing us through the darkness, hungry for our fear. The whispers grew louder, wrapping around us like a noose, and as we burst back into the clearing, I realized that whatever we had disturbed in the woods was not finished with us yet. The fire flickered in the stillness of the night, its warmth offering a brief respite from the unsettling energy that surrounded us. As we settled back down, the unease from our earlier excursion began to melt into a new kind of tension. The whispers had faded, but the feeling of being watched lingered like a chill in the air. Danny, attempting to shake off the unease, leaned in closer to the fire. "All right, who's got another story?" he asked, his bravado returning. Megan shrugged, glancing around at the group. "I've got one," she said, her voice low and deliberate. "Have you all heard about the creature that takes the form of someone you know? They say it mimics their voice, looks just like them, and it lures you in until it's too late." I felt a shiver run down my spine as she spoke, recalling the old tales from my childhood that echoed eerily in her words. The legend was as familiar as it was chilling, a dark shadow lurking in the recesses of my memory. "They say it can make you see things, too. It plays with your mind," Megan continued, her eyes darting nervously around the campsite. "People have reported hearing their loved ones calling for them, only to discover it was the creature, hungry for their trust." The air felt thick with anticipation as the fire crackled, the flames dancing ominously. "That's just a legend," Sam scoffed, though I could see the tension in his shoulders. "It's just another story meant to scare kids." "But what if it's true?" I countered, my voice barely above a whisper. "What if something really is out there?" "Relax, it's just a story," Danny chimed in again, but his bravado was waning. "Besides, we're all here together. Nothing can get us." As Megan wrapped up her tale, a heavy silence enveloped us. The night seemed to deepen, and the stars flickered overhead, distant and uncaring. It was then that I noticed something unsettling. The forest around us felt alive, breathing and shifting, shadows flickering just beyond the firelight. Moments later, we began to hear faint sounds in the distance, as if something, was moving among the trees. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my heart racing again. Just the wind, Danny said quickly, but I could see the unease creeping into his expression. A few minutes later, as the silence threatened to suffocate us, Sam spoke up, his voice shaking. I think I saw something back there, he said, pointing toward the tree line. It looked like someone I know. Who? Megan asked, her curiosity piqued despite her fear. My brother, Sam replied, his gaze fixated on the shadows. He was just standing there, watching us. What? I blurted, my heart pounding. Are you sure it wasn't just your imagination? I thought so too, he insisted, his voice trembling. But it looked exactly like him. Same jacket, same hair. And then he just disappeared. The tension in the air thickened, and I felt the familiar unease seep back in. What if it's the creature? I wondered aloud, dread pooling in my stomach. Stop it, Danny said, his voice rising defensively. You're all being ridiculous. There's no creature out here. Just shadows and our imaginations running wild. Easy for you to say, Megan snapped. You haven't seen anything. In that moment, I felt it, a tingling sensation creeping up my spine as if eyes were boring into my back. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see something lurking just out of sight. Nothing but darkness met my gaze, but the sensation remained unshakable. Let's just get back to the stories, I suggested, desperate to change the subject. Maybe it will take our minds off this feeling. Good idea, Danny agreed, though his voice was less enthusiastic. Another camper, Jake, spoke up, his face pale. I've got a story too. It's about a girl who went into the woods and saw something familiar. She thought it was her sister calling her name, but it was really the creature. By the time she realized it, it was too late. As Jake recounted the harrowing tale, I couldn't help but feel the weight of the night pressing down on us. The firelight flickered, casting long, grotesque shadows that seemed to stretch and warp along the ground. Every night after, she'd hear her sister's voice, always just out of reach, Jake continued, his voice low and eerie. But each time she followed it, she was led deeper into the woods until she vanished entirely. Just then, a rustling noise came from behind us, sharp and sudden. We all jumped, turning toward the sound, but nothing was there. The forest stood still, but the air was electric, charged with an unseen energy. Okay, that's enough stories for one night, I said, trying to mask the fear creeping into my voice. Let's just sit tight and enjoy the fire. Right, Danny said, his laugh a little too forced. Nothing to worry about. But as we fell silent, I noticed the shadows shifting again, and the feeling of being watched returned, stronger this time. I felt a chill run down my spine, and I couldn't shake the sensation that something, or someone, was out there, mimicking our fears and feeding on our unease. As the fire began to die down, the flickering light revealed glimpses of movement in the periphery, a phantom presence dancing just beyond the reach of the flames. And that's when I caught sight of it, a figure lurking in the darkness, indistinct yet eerily familiar. Dies. I started, my voice trembling as I pointed toward the shadows. The figure moved, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flash of blonde hair and a smile, a face I recognized all too well. Sarah? I whispered, my breath catching in my throat. But as quickly as it appeared, the figure melted back into the shadows, leaving nothing but the echo of a haunting laugh, familiar yet twisted. The fire sputtered as if struggling to hold onto the last threads of light, and I could see the fear mirrored in my friend's eyes. Did you see that? Megan asked, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know what I saw, I admitted, feeling the walls of reality begin to blur around us. The stories had come to life, wrapping us in a cocoon of fear, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that the creature was among us, wearing the faces of those we loved. We need to get out of here, I urged, glancing toward the darkness again. We're not safe. No one is going anywhere, a voice whispered from the shadows, chilling us to our core. It wasn't any of us, it was a voice that sent chills down my spine, familiar yet laced with malice. In an instant, the night erupted into chaos as we scrambled back, hearts pounding. The shadows shifted once more, and I felt the cold breath of fear creeping closer, each moment dragging us deeper into the nightmare we had unwittingly invited. Run! I shouted, and without hesitation, we turned to flee, the whispers growing louder behind us, echoing the fear we tried so hard to escape. The stories had come alive, and now we were trapped in a tale of our own making, one that threatened to consume us whole. The shadows cast by the dwindling fire danced like restless spirits, their movements eerily hypnotic as we huddled close, our hearts pounding in our chests. The laughter and banter that had once filled the air had been replaced by a heavy silence, thick with tension. As the stories grew darker, so did the atmosphere around us, and I could feel the weight of unseen eyes pressing against my skin. We need to ground ourselves, Danny said, his voice trembling slightly as he attempted to rally us. Let's tell a story, something we all know. Something to remind us that it's all just make-believe. I've got one, Megan said, her eyes wide, reflecting the flickering firelight. It's about a hiker who went missing in these very woods, never found. They say he wandered too deep, following the sound of his own name, and the forest just swallowed him whole. As she spoke, I felt a shiver course through me. I had heard the tale before, a cautionary fable about the forest's insatiable hunger. They say the trees hide the lost, twisting paths to lead you astray. You can hear their voices if you listen closely, but it's all just a trick to lure you deeper, she continued, her tone hushed. The rest of us exchanged nervous glances. That's a little too real right now, don't you think? Sam chuckled nervously, but there was no humor in his eyes. Megan ignored him, her voice dropping lower. Some say the forest isn't just a place, it's a living entity, a predator. It feasts on the lost and the fearful. Every time someone disappears, it gets stronger. It learns. As the story unfolded, I could feel the forest around us begin to hum with an energy that was unsettling, as if the trees themselves were listening intently to Megan's words. My skin prickled, and I glanced into the darkness, half expecting to see something watching us from the shadows. Okay, enough of that, Danny said, shaking his head. We need to lighten the mood. Who's up for a joke? Just then, a rustling noise broke through the stillness, loud and jarring. We all froze, eyes wide as the sound echoed from the tree limb. The laughter and bravado drained from the air, replaced by an overwhelming sense of dread. Did you hear that? I whispered, my heart racing. Yeah, Sam replied, voice strained. What was that? Without warning, a figure dashed past the edge of the firelight, a fleeting shadow that sent us all scrambling backward. Guys, where's Jake? Megan exclaimed, glancing around the fire. Didn't he go to grab some firewood? Danny asked, his face pale. He should be back by now. I felt a rising panic as the realization hit me. What if he... Jake! Sam shouted into the darkness, his voice echoing through the trees. No response. Just the rustling, growing louder and closer, weaving through the underbrush as if mocking our fear. "Let's go find him," I suggested, but even as I spoke, I hesitated, knowing the forest was treacherous and filled with the very stories we had been recounting. "Are you crazy?" Megan hissed. "We can't just leave the fire. It's our only source of light." The rustling grew nearer, and I felt a chill settle deep in my bones. "What if it's him?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "What if he's in trouble? Or what if he's not?" Danny countered, his eyes darting around, searching the shadows. "What if whatever got him is now after us?" My heart sank. The thought was unbearable, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we had crossed some unseen line. The stories had awakened something, and it was hungry. "Stay together," I commanded, my voice firm despite my racing heart. "We'll go in pairs. One of us stays here with the fire while the others search." "No," Megan shook her head vehemently. "We need to stay put. We'll just end up lost too." Just as the tension reached a breaking point, the rustling stopped and an unsettling silence enveloped us. "Jake!" Sam called again, desperation creeping into his tone. I strained my ears, hoping to catch a hint of his voice, but all that met us was the echo of the woods swallowing our calls. "We can't just sit here," I insisted. "He could be hurt." Before anyone could respond, another rustle broke the silence, followed by an echoing whisper that seemed to weave through the trees. "Help!" It was barely audible, but I recognized that voice. "Jake!" I shouted, adrenaline surging through me as I bolted toward the sound. "Wait!" Megan called after me, but I could barely hear her over the pounding of my heart. I pushed through the underbrush, my senses heightened, every nerve ending screaming as I ventured deeper into the woods. "Jake!" I yelled, calling out as I ventured farther from the firelight. The darkness swallowed me, the trees towering like sentinels watching my every move. I could feel the air shift, thickening as I moved further from the camp. The whispering grew louder, echoing in my mind. "Help me!" It was Jake's voice, no doubt. Panic surged through me as I navigated the maze of trees, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. I stumbled over roots and uneven ground, the whispers twisting around me, mocking my desperation. The path grew darker, the sounds of the campsite fading away. "Jake!" I shouted again, but the only answer was the rustling of leaves and the distant sound of my heart pounding in my ears. Then, as I paused to listen, I felt it, the weight of silence. The forest seemed to hold its breath, and in that moment, I sensed I was not alone. Something was moving among the trees, something just beyond my sight. I turned, fear racing through me, and saw a shadow dart behind a tree. "Jake!" I called, my voice echoing back eerily. But the shadow didn't respond, it lingered there, just outside the firelight. "Is that you?" I took a step closer, heart racing, the darkness pressing in around me. Suddenly, the figure stepped into the light, only it wasn't Jake. It was someone else, someone familiar but wrong. Their face twisted into a haunting smile that sent chills through me. "Help," they whispered, mimicking Jake's voice perfectly. I stumbled back, panic rising. "What are you?" I gasped, the realization dawning on me that this was not Jake, but the creature Megan had warned us about. "Help," it repeated, inching closer. The air grew cold around me, and I felt the grip of fear tighten. I turned to flee, the forest blurring into a dizzying mass of shadows as I ran back toward the fire. But the whispers followed, echoing through the trees, wrapping around me like a shroud. I could hear my friends calling out, and the darkness seemed to thicken, swallowing their voices until they were mere echoes in my mind. Just as I burst back into the clearing, breathless and terrified, I found the campfire sputtering weakly, the light flickering like a dying ember. "Where's Jake?" Sam shouted, his voice edged with panic. He's gone," I panted, collapsing beside the fire. "He's not alone." "What do you mean?" Megan demanded, her eyes wide with fear. "It's in the woods," I stammered, pointing back toward the trees. "It's imitating him." In that moment, the fire crackled violently, and a gust of wind blew through the clearing, snuffing out the flames and plunging us into darkness. "Stay close," I shouted, instinctively grabbing Megan's arm. We huddled together, straining to see into the inky blackness that had enveloped us. Suddenly, a pair of glowing eyes appeared just beyond the trees, shimmering in the dark like twin moons. They watched us intently, reflecting the faintest hint of light before vanishing into the shadows. "Get the flashlight," Danny shouted, his voice rising above the panic. In the chaos, I scrambled to my bag, hands trembling as I fumbled for the flashlight. I clicked it on, the beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating the edges of the clearing but doing little to penetrate the dense forest beyond. "Where did it go?" Megan whispered, her voice shaking. I glanced around, the reality of our situation crashing down on me. "It's not gone," I murmured, my heart racing. "It's watching us, waiting." As we stood there, hearts pounding, the rustling resumed, growing louder, surrounding us from all sides. The trees seemed to close in, the whispers returning, taunting us as we realized the stories had come to life. We were the prey, and the forest was the hunter. "We need to stick together," I said, my voice stealing with determination. "Whatever this thing is, it thrives on our fear. We can't let it take us one by one." The glowing eyes flickered again, darting among the trees, and the forest seemed to come alive with movement, shadows flitting just beyond our vision. Fight or flight, I thought, adrenaline surging through me. We can't run. We need to stand our ground. But as I looked at my friends, I realized we were already trapped, caught in the forest's web, and the only escape was through the terrifying unknown that awaited us in the dark. The darkness felt alive, a tangible force pressing against us as we gathered in the small, flickering light of the flashlight. The beam danced nervously over the campsite, illuminating the scattered items that had once belonged to Jake. His backpack lay abandoned by the fire, one strap twisted and tangled in the roots of an old tree. A half-eaten granola bar rested on the ground nearby, the wrapper fluttering in the cold breeze. "Why would he leave all this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "He wouldn't," Sam replied, his eyes darting around the clearing. "He was just here. He wouldn't just wander off." Megan bent down to pick up the backpack, her fingers trembling as she opened it. "Maybe he was taken," she suggested, her voice shaking. "Maybe whatever's out there got him." "Stop it," Danny snapped, frustration boiling over. "We need to focus. This isn't the time for wild theories. We need to find him." "Find him?" I echoed, heart pounding. "How can we do that when we don't even know where he is?" As if in answer, a voice drifted through the trees, echoing hauntingly around us. "Help! Help me! Jake!" Sam called out, but there was no response. Just the eerie repetition of the voice, fading into the night like a whispered secret. "It's not him," Megan said, stepping back, fear etched on her face. "That's not him." "Then what is it?" I asked, panic rising as I turned toward the source of the sound. What is happening? I think it's the stories, Danny said, his voice low and intense. The uninvited guest that can mimic voices. The thing that... Shut up, Sam yelled, cutting him off. We don't need more stories right now. We need to think straight. The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to choke on as we all fell silent, listening. I could hear the whispering wind, the rustle of leaves, but also that voice, Jake's voice, echoing from different directions, taunting us, leading us deeper into the darkness. Help! Help me! It came again, clearer now, but warped, twisted, like an echo of an echo. Do you hear it? I whispered, my breath hitching. It's not real, Danny insisted, his eyes wide with disbelief. It can't be. It is real. Megan shot back. He's out there. We need to find him. The panic boiled over, and accusations began to fly. How do we know you didn't do something to him? Sam turned on Danny, anger coursing through him. You were the last one near the edge of the woods when he went missing. Don't put this on me, Danny retorted, his voice rising. I didn't do anything. You think I hurt him? I'm just as scared as you are. Maybe you should be. Megan spat, her eyes flashing. We all are. But we can't let this thing divide us. We need to focus. Focus? You're the one who kept telling the scariest stories. Sam shot back, stepping closer to her. What did you think would happen? We're in danger, and you're fighting about who's to blame? I interrupted, trying to calm the storm brewing around us. This is exactly what it wants. It's trying to tear us apart. The whispers grew louder, almost mocking us as if the very forest fed off our fears and suspicions. Help, help me, Jake's voice was insistent, a plea that pulled at my heartstrings and tightened the knot of dread in my stomach. Do you think it's actually him? Megan whispered, her eyes darting to the shadows. What if it's not? Does it matter? I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. We have to go find him. If that is Jake, he needs us. But what if it's a trap? Danny countered, glancing over his shoulder as the wind picked up, rustling through the leaves ominously. Before I could respond, a loud crack echoed from the direction of the voice, a sound like a tree splitting, and we all flinched in unison. Enough. We're going in, I declared, determination flooding my veins. I'm not losing another friend to this thing. Who's with me? Silence fell, heavy and uncomfortable. One by one, I looked into their faces, searching for a flicker of resolve. I'll go, Megan said, taking a step forward, her expression a mixture of fear and defiance. Me too, Sam added, his voice steadier now, as though the adrenaline had overridden his doubts. I'll stay here, Danny said, voice trembling as he glanced back at the fire, now merely glowing embers. If he comes back, I'll be here. No, I insisted, shaking my head. We need everyone. We need to stay together. Strength in numbers, right? Besides, if this thing can mimic us, it could try to trick you into thinking we're back. Fine, Danny conceded, glancing between us. But if we go out there, we stick close. No wandering off. Agreed? Agreed, I said, gathering my courage. Let's move. With our flashlight leading the way, we stepped into the darkness, hearts pounding as we followed the echoing pleas that seemed to reverberate through the trees. Each step felt heavier, the air thick with anticipation, as though the forest was watching our every move. Stay sharp, I whispered, glancing at my friends. If you hear anything at all, let us know. We can't let it play with our heads. As we walked deeper into the woods, the shadows stretched and twisted around us, the darkness alive with unseen dangers. The echoes grew more pronounced, almost rhythmic, as if they were leading us towards something or someone. Help me, it taunted, drawing us closer, and with every repetition, the fear in my chest tightened like a noose. Are we even sure this is Jake? Sam asked, breaking the silence, his voice quavering. What if it's the thing trying to get us? I glanced back at him, a chill running down my spine. We have to believe it is. It has to be. Then the voice changed, morphing into a distorted version of my own. Help me, it echoed, chilling me to the bone. Please. Did you hear that? Megan cried, her voice rising in panic. Yes, I said, fear clawing at my throat. It's trying to divide us. Don't listen to it. Stay close. I shouted, trying to suppress the rising tide of panic, but even I could hear the tremor in my voice. The forest seemed to close in around us, shadows dancing like phantoms, and the whispers grew louder, blending into a cacophony of pleas and mockery. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, a person, or at least it looked like one. Help, it called, but the voice was all wrong, distorted and echoing through the air. Jake? I shouted, desperate for a response. The figure tilted its head, the face a nightmarish parody of my friend, but the eyes were hollow, empty. Help me, please, it begged, and for a moment, my heart wavered. No! It's a trick! Sam shouted, and with a surge of adrenaline, I lunged forward, swinging the flashlight in its direction, illuminating the creature for a brief moment. It recoiled, vanishing back into the shadows, but I could still hear it, a distorted laugh, echoing through the trees, sending chills down my spine. What the hell was that? Megan gasped, stepping back, her breath quickening. It's playing with us, I realized, the implications crashing down around me. It knows our fears, our weaknesses. It's using Jake against us. Panic surged as the forest seemed to come alive, shadows flickering and merging, voices swirling around us like a storm. Jake! I shouted, my voice breaking through the chaos. We're here. Just call out. Help me, the voice came again, echoing from multiple directions, each sounding more desperate than the last. Which way? Sam cried, his eyes wide with fear. How do we know which one is real? It doesn't matter. I shouted, clenching my fists. We have to choose. In that moment, the air thickened, and for a heartbeat, I felt a strange sensation, a flicker of warmth, like a memory, pushing through the darkness. It was Jake. I felt it. Follow me. I yelled, racing toward the voice that felt most real, weaving through the trees with my friends close behind. Help me. The voice grew stronger, and we stumbled forward, our hearts pounding as we pushed through the underbrush, guided by the fading echoes. Suddenly, we broke into a clearing, and there he was, Jake, or at least what looked like him, standing amidst the trees, shrouded in shadow. Jake! I called, relief flooding my chest. We found you. But as we approached, the figure twisted, morphing into something else, something dark and twisted. Help me, it echoed, its face contorting into a horrifying grin. Run! I shouted, turning back just in time to see the shadows swallow the creature whole. It's not him. It's not real. The night erupted into chaos as we fled, hearts racing and minds racing even faster. The forest twisted and turned around us, the shadows closing in, and the echoes of our fears followed like hounds on our heels. "Where do we go?" Megan shouted, her voice tinged with panic. "Back to the fire," I yelled, desperation driving my words. "We have to regroup." As we dashed through the underbrush, branches clawing at us like skeletal hands, I could feel the darkness creeping closer, eager to engulf us whole. I glanced back, and for a fleeting moment, I saw it, the creature, a mere shadow among the trees, waiting patiently, relishing in our fear. But I wouldn't let it win. Not now, not ever. With every ounce of strength left in me, I pushed forward, determination igniting a fire within. We had to fight against the darkness, against the whispers that promised despair. "Stay together," I shouted, focusing on the glow of the campfire in the distance. But as we ran, the shadows seemed to twist and warp around us, taunting us with flickers of light, distorting our senses. "Help me," Jake's voice echoed one last time as we reached the edge of the clearing, and with a final burst of energy, we burst through the tree line into the safety of the firelight. But as we skidded to a halt, my heart sank. The fire flickered, casting ominous shadows that danced like specters around us, and the campsite was eerily quiet. "Where's Danny?" Megan whispered, her voice trembling. A cold dread settled in my stomach as I looked around. "Danny?" I called, panic surging through me once more. "Where are you?" Help me," came the voice again, but this time it was unmistakably Danny's, echoing from deep within the woods, drowning out all rational thought. "Oh God," Sam murmured, fear washing over him. No, I whispered, my heart pounding in my chest. "We have to go back." But as we turned to face the darkness, the whispers began again, swirling around us, wrapping us in a cocoon of dread. And in that moment, I realized we weren't just facing a monster. We were facing our own worst fears, and the forest was feeding off our terror. "Stay strong," I yelled, trying to rally us together, but deep down, I felt the darkness closing in, a hungry maw waiting to devour us whole. We had to break the cycle, but the only question remained, would we be able to escape before it consumed us? With our hearts pounding, we turned back toward the shadows, determined to find Danny and confront the thing that had ensnared us all. The darkness might be strong, but together, we would face whatever horrors awaited us. After all, we were stronger than our fears. Together, we would fight back against the very shadows that sought to claim us. The fire crackled softly, casting an orange glow that flickered against the encroaching darkness. We huddled close, a fragile barrier against the chill of the night. Each of us was haunted, not just by our missing friends, but by the memories of what we had witnessed, the grotesque shadows and the warped voices that played with our minds. We needed a distraction, a way to keep the terror at bay, if only for a moment. "Let's tell another story," I suggested, my voice shaking slightly as I shifted my gaze toward the shadows beyond the firelight. "Something to take our minds off everything." Megan nodded, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting to see something lurking just out of sight. "I heard a tale about a cursed item once," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "They say it brings misfortune to anyone who owns it. People have gone missing, lost their minds, or worse." "What's the item?" Sam asked, leaning in closer, his curiosity piqued despite the fear gnawing at him. "It's an old mirror," Megan explained, her eyes wide, reflecting the flickering flames. "It's said to show you not just your reflection, but your darkest fears and regrets. If you stare into it long enough, it can drive you mad." Sounds like the perfect story for tonight, Danny muttered, sarcasm lacing his words, though I could tell he was just as interested as the rest of us. What happens to the people who own it? They're haunted, Megan continued, the shadows deepening around us. They start seeing things, figures that aren't there, whispers that torment them. It's like the mirror opens a door to their worst nightmares. As she spoke, I felt an odd prickling sensation crawl up my spine. It was as if the very air around us thickened with anticipation, making me acutely aware of every rustle in the trees. Is it even real? Danny scoffed, though a flicker of doubt crept into his voice. I don't know, Megan said, her brow furrowing. But they say if you touch it, the curse attaches to you. You might even start seeing things from the moment you hold it. Just then, a low rustling came from the trees behind us, and I froze. Did you hear that? I whispered, my heart racing. It's probably just a deer or something, Sam replied, though the uncertainty in his voice told me he wasn't convinced. We should check it out, I suggested, trying to sound braver than I felt. If it's just an animal, we can scare it off. Reluctantly, we stood and crept toward the sound, hearts pounding as we ventured into the dark. The shadows closed in around us, the branches whispering secrets above our heads, until we stumbled upon a small clearing. At the center lay something glimmering in the moonlight, a small object half buried in the leaves. It was a compact mirror, its surface dusty but still reflective. I can't believe it, Megan gasped, stepping closer. It's just like the one in the story. It's probably just junk, Danny said, though he eyed the mirror with a mix of curiosity and trepidation. Let's take it back, I said, kneeling to pick it up. The moment my fingers brushed against its cool surface, a shiver coursed through me. Wait, Sam said, a sudden look of concern crossing his face. Maybe we shouldn't mess with it. Too late now, I replied, holding it up for everyone to see. What if it really is cursed? Megan's eyes sparkled with a mix of fear and excitement. We have to test it. Let's see what happens. With a collective breath, we returned to the campsite, and I set the mirror down beside the fire. The flames flickered against its surface, and for a moment, I felt a strange pull, an urge to look deeper into it. Megan leaned in first, peering at her reflection. What do you see? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Just me, she said, but I could see her brow furrowing, the smile fading from her lips. But something's off. I feel uneasy. Let me try, Sam said, eager to change the mood. He leaned over, and as he gazed into the mirror, his face paled. Guys. I don't like this. I see someone behind me. What? I asked, a lump forming in my throat. What do you mean? Someone's standing right behind me, he whispered, his voice trembling. Turn around. Megan urged, but Sam's eyes were glued to the mirror. No. I don't want to look, he shouted, backing away. Just look. I insisted, my own heart racing. But before he could turn, the shadows around us began to twist and writhe, as if the forest itself was alive. The fire flickered violently, casting eerie shapes against the trees, and for a brief moment, I saw something, a dark figure standing just beyond the reach of the light. Do you see that? I gasped, pointing toward the darkness. See what? Danny asked, but before I could respond, Megan let out a terrified scream. There's something in the mirror, she cried, stumbling backward. I saw a face. We all turned toward the mirror, and as the shadows shifted, we caught a glimpse of it, a distorted face, twisted and anguished, staring back at us. It wasn't a reflection, it was something more. "What the hell is that?" Danny shouted, panic setting in. "I don't know," I yelled, adrenaline surging through me as I grabbed the mirror. "We need to get rid of this thing." But as I lifted it, the air around us seemed to crackle with energy. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent. "Help! Help me!" echoed from the mirror, the voice a jumbled mix of our own, intertwined with something darker. "What's happening?" Megan cried, fear etched on her face as the shadows began to swirl faster around us. "It's the curse!" I shouted, the mirror shaking in my hands. "We've unleashed something." As we struggled to break free from the grip of the hallucinations, the line between reality and nightmare blurred. The ground felt unsteady beneath my feet, and I could see visions flickering in the corners of my eyes, figures lurking in the darkness, shadows of our past selves haunting us. Suddenly, Sam collapsed, his hands clutching his head. "Make it stop! I can't take this anymore," he screamed, his voice echoing with despair. "Sam!" Megan rushed to his side, but as she knelt beside him, she too started to tremble. "I see them. I see them," she cried, her eyes wide with terror. "They're all around us." "What do you see?" I asked, desperation clawing at me as I tried to shake Sam back to reality. "Shadows, faces, things that shouldn't be here," he gasped, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "They're coming for us." I could feel the panic rising, a wave of fear threatening to swallow us whole. "We have to get rid of the mirror. Now! Just throw it away!" Danny shouted, backing away as if the mirror itself were alive, a creature hungry for our despair. I glanced back at the reflection, and the distorted faces swirled within it, an unholy amalgamation of our fears. "No!" I shouted, my voice rising above the chaos. "We won't let it win." Gathering every ounce of strength, I hurled the mirror into the depths of the forest, watching as it shattered against the ground, pieces scattering in all directions. A deafening silence followed, the whispers fading into nothingness, and the shadows retreated, leaving us breathless and shaken. "Is it over?" Megan panted, her eyes darting around the campsite, scanning for any signs of the nightmare that had just unfolded. "I don't know," I admitted, still reeling from the intensity of the hallucinations. "But we can't stay here. Not now." As we regrouped, each of us trembling from the lingering effects of the curse, we began to walk back to the campfire, the fear still palpable in the air. But even as we moved, I couldn't shake the feeling that something remained, an echo of the curse that had seeped into our minds, lurking just beneath the surface. "Let's just sit tight until morning," I suggested, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We'll figure things out then." And so we huddled close to the fire once more, the embers flickering in the dark, a fragile barrier against the shadows that threatened to consume us. But as I glanced into the darkness beyond the firelight, I couldn't shake the feeling that the night was far from over. The whispers lingered, and the shadows seemed to dance with a life of their own, watching, waiting for their chance to strike again. And I wondered, had we truly escaped, or had we merely awakened something far worse? The fire flickered ominously, casting long shadows that danced across the ground. We huddled together, our breaths coming in quick gasps as the weight of the night pressed heavily on our shoulders. The darkness of the forest loomed around us, thickening with every whispered story and chilling encounter we had endured. "I think we need to end this," Megan said, her voice trembling but resolute. If every story we've told has come true, then maybe we need to share our deepest fears, our truths. Perhaps that will break whatever cycle we're in. A heavy silence fell over us, each of us considering the gravity of what she suggested. It felt like a last-ditch effort, a desperate grasp for control over the nightmare that had unfolded around us. "I'll go first," I offered, my heart racing. My biggest fear has always been being trapped, feeling completely helpless while something terrible is happening just out of reach. I glanced into the shadows, half expecting the figures from the mirror to re-emerge. I hate the thought of losing control, and tonight, it's like everything I feared is coming to life. "I can relate to that," Sam said, his voice shaking as he met my gaze. "For me, it's betrayal. The idea that someone I trust could turn against me, leading to my downfall. I've felt that before, and tonight, I felt it more than ever." With each voice we heard, I kept wondering if one of us would be next. "I don't want to talk about my fears," Danny muttered, his arms crossed defensively. "This is stupid." But Megan pressed on. "We can't ignore this. You're part of this too, Danny. What are you afraid of?" Danny looked around, as if assessing the group's reactions before he reluctantly sighed. "Fine. I'm afraid of the dark. I know it sounds childish, but I've had nightmares since I was a kid, darkness closing in, swallowing everything. It's hard to shake off when you're out here, and it feels like it's coming to life." "See? That's part of it," Megan encouraged, her eyes pleading. "We need to be honest with each other. If this loop is tied to our fears, maybe confronting them will give us the strength to break it." The tension hung thick in the air, but Danny finally relented, nodding slowly. "Okay, I'll share something else. My fear goes deeper than just the dark. I lost someone once, someone I was supposed to protect, and I couldn't save them. That haunts me." "Who?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. He hesitated, looking into the fire. "My sister. She disappeared one night while I was supposed to be watching her. I didn't take her seriously when she told me she heard something outside. I didn't believe her. And then she was gone." A collective gasp rose from the group, and the realization hit us like a cold wave. "This forest, it's where it happened, isn't it?" Megan's voice was barely above a whisper. "You brought us here to face your fear." "I thought it would help," Danny said, his voice cracking. "I thought I could confront it, put it to rest." Suddenly, the air felt heavy, and I could sense the tension in the group shifting. What if we're not just facing fears? I ventured cautiously. What if we're actually reliving your nightmare, Danny? "No," he shouted, standing abruptly. "This isn't about me. It's about all of us." "Then tell us your story," I pressed, my heart pounding as I tried to keep my voice steady. "You said you thought you could put it to rest. What if the forest is feeding off our fears and experiences?" Danny hesitated, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Finally, he sank back to the ground, defeated. "Okay, when I was 12, I was supposed to watch over my sister. She was outside playing while I was inside. I could hear her laughing, but then it just stopped. I looked outside, and she was gone." The memories seemed to claw at him, the pain evident in his eyes. "I searched for hours. I never found her. The police were called, but they searched for days, weeks. She was just gone." Megan's voice was soft. "And you think she's tied to this place?" "I don't know," he shouted again, his emotions spilling over. But what if she is? What if she's still out there? The fire crackled, and as Danny's confession hung in the air, I felt a shift, a tightening in my chest. What if that's why we're all here? Each of us has a fear tied to this forest, and the stories we've told have fed it. We're all connected somehow. Then we need to confront this, Sam said firmly, his resolve hardening. If the forest is feeding off our fears, maybe facing them together can break this loop. What do you suggest? Danny asked, his voice strained. We each share our stories, our deepest fears, and then we do it together, Sam replied, determination burning in his eyes. We stand united against whatever darkness has taken root here. I nodded, feeling the weight of the group's gazes upon me. Then let's do it. We'll face whatever comes. With newfound determination, we began to share the truths we had buried deep within. One by one, we unveiled our fears and secrets, each story intertwining like a web, binding us together. Megan spoke of her fear of being abandoned, recalling a childhood incident where she lost her best friend to a tragic accident. I always worry that if I let someone in, they'll just leave me again. Sam revealed his fear of being insignificant, of fading into the background. I've always felt overshadowed, like I was just there for everyone else but never mattered myself. It's why I always try so hard to be the life of the party. As the confessions poured out, I felt a sense of catharsis wash over us. Each story broke down the barriers of fear that had built up, exposing the raw wounds we all carried. The darkness around us felt less menacing, a mere shadow compared to the light of our truths. But just as I began to believe we might break the cycle, a chilling wind swept through the clearing, snuffing the fire's glow and plunging us into darkness. The trees creaked and groaned, and the air thickened with an overwhelming sense of dread. Stay together, I shouted as the whispers returned, echoing our fears back to us. We're stronger than this. But as we huddled together, a figure emerged from the shadows, a dark silhouette, cloaked in the very essence of our nightmares. Who are you? I called out, my heart racing as the figure stepped closer, its form shifting and changing, reflecting each of our fears. I am the manifestation of your darkest secrets, it rasped, its voice a chorus of our own. I have fed off your fears, and now you shall face the truth of what you've hidden. No, we won't let you. Megan shouted, stepping forward, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. You're nothing but a figment of our imagination. The figure laughed, a sound that echoed with the weight of our own insecurities. You think you can simply wish me away? You've given me power, and now you must confront the very essence of what you fear most. As it loomed closer, I could feel the darkness pressing in on us, suffocating and consuming. But something in me ignited, a spark of defiance. We are more than our fears, I shouted, my voice rising above the encroaching shadows. We are our stories, and they don't define us. Megan stepped beside me, followed by Sam and Danny. Together, we are stronger, she proclaimed. You can't hold us captive any longer. The figure hesitated, the shadows flickering as if uncertain. It let out a howl, a sound that shook the very ground beneath us, but we stood our ground, refusing to back down. In that moment, we united, our voices rising in a crescendo of defiance. We are not afraid, we shouted together, the echoes of our truths reverberating through the night. And as we confronted the darkness, the figure began to dissolve, its form shattering into a million fragments that scattered into the wind. With a final, anguished scream, it vanished, leaving us standing in the clearing, breathless and trembling but alive. The fire reignited, the warm glow illuminating our faces, and for the first time that night, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. "We did it," Sam whispered, disbelief coloring his voice. But as I looked around, I knew we couldn't let our guard down. The forest still held its secrets, and we would have to remain vigilant. But we had faced our fears head-on, united in our struggle. "Let's make it through the night," I said, a determined smile creeping onto my face. "Tomorrow, we'll find a way out of this forest for good." And as we settled back around the fire, the flickering flames casting warm shadows on our faces, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had only begun to unravel the mysteries that lay hidden in the darkness of the woods. But for now, we were safe, and that was enough. The first light of dawn broke through the dense canopy of trees, casting pale rays onto the forest floor. It felt surreal, the warm glow of the morning sun contrasting sharply with the cold grip of fear that had wrapped around us throughout the night. We had faced so much already, yet I could sense that our trials were not over. Gathered around the fire, the remnants of our group huddled close together, exhaustion etched on our faces. We needed to face the source of our terror, the dark entity that had preyed on our fears. But how could we confront something so nebulous, something that had taken the form of our deepest secrets and hidden truths? I cleared my throat, my heart racing. "Let's tell a story about confronting a dark entity," I suggested. "It's time we put our words into action. If they hold power, we can use that power to fight back." Megan nodded, her eyes shining with determination. "We have to fight for our freedom, for our lives." Sam spoke up, his voice steady. "We can't let it control us anymore. We have to stand together, no matter what form our fears take." "Then let's start," Danny said, taking a deep breath. In our story, the campers will face a dark entity that preys on their fears, just like we have. They must confront it together, not allowing it to divide them. As we wove the story together, each word seemed to breathe life into the flickering flames before us. We painted a picture of campers lost in the forest, chased by a shadowy figure that whispered their insecurities. The atmosphere grew thick with tension as we spoke of the campers' determination to face the dark entity that haunted them. "The entity grows stronger with each fear it feeds on," I narrated, my voice growing more passionate. "But when the campers unite and confront their truths, they find strength in each other." As we continued, a chill swept through the clearing. The trees whispered around us, and the shadows flickered, as if they were listening to our words, aware of the challenge we were laying down. And when they finally faced the entity, they realized it takes on the shape of their fears, Megan added, her voice shaking with urgency. "It's no longer an abstract darkness, but something tangible and terrifying, a monster made of their regrets, their failures, their guilt." Sam's eyes sparkled with determination. But together, they shout out their fears, claiming their power over the entity. Each fear is transformed into a weapon against it. Words are powerful, and they can cut through the darkness. As we told our story, the air grew heavy, crackling with energy. I could feel the dark entity lurking just beyond the edges of the firelight, sensing our defiance. It was as if our words were summoning it, drawing it closer, and yet we felt emboldened by the act of storytelling itself. "Now, we must face it," I declared. With the rising sun, we call upon the light to banish the shadows. Suddenly, a gust of wind whipped through the campsite, extinguishing the flames and plunging us into darkness. Panic surged within me, but I knew we had to stand our ground. The shadows coalesced into a shape, a tall, looming figure, featureless yet malevolent, its presence suffocating. It radiated an aura of despair and darkness, and I could hear the whispers rising around us, echoing our fears, taunting us. "Face me," it hissed, its voice a chilling blend of our own insecurities. "You cannot escape what you fear." but we were no longer just individuals haunted by our nightmares. Together, we stood united, and as we took a step forward, I felt the energy shift. "No!" I shouted, my voice rising above the cacophony. "You are nothing but a manifestation of our fears. You have no power here." With our hearts pounding in unison, we spoke our fears aloud, declaring them with fierce conviction. "You can't hold us captive anymore. You are just a shadow, a whisper in the dark." As we shouted our truths, the entity writhed and twisted, flickering like a candle flame in the wind. With every declaration of strength, it shrank back, the shadows losing their grip on us. Danny stepped forward, his voice steady. "I lost my sister, but that does not define me. I will not carry this guilt any longer." Megan followed suit, her voice strong. "I fear abandonment, but I know that I am worthy of love and friendship." Sam raised his chin defiantly. "I may feel insignificant, but I matter. I am here, and I am alive." With every declaration, the dark figure recoiled, its form flickering and disintegrating like smoke. The air crackled with energy, and I felt a surge of hope rise within me. "Together, we are stronger," I shouted, my voice resonating through the darkness. "You cannot control us." In that moment of unity, a brilliant light erupted from the center of our group, illuminating the clearing and driving back the shadows. The darkness shivered, writhed, and with one final howl of defiance, the entity shattered into a million shards of darkness, scattering into the trees. As the light broke through, the sun crested the horizon, bathing the forest in warm, golden hues. The oppressive weight of fear lifted, and I felt a wave of relief wash over us. We stood there, breathless, hearts racing, but united in our victory. We had faced our fears and emerged stronger, together. Did we do it?" Megan asked, her voice shaking with disbelief. "I think we did," I replied, glancing around at my friends, my heart swelling with gratitude and relief. We faced the darkness and claimed our power over it. As we gathered our belongings, ready to leave the forest behind, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. We had been changed by this experience, transformed in ways we hadn't expected. But as we made our way out of the clearing, a lingering thought nagged at the back of my mind. Had we truly defeated the darkness, or had we simply pushed it away for now? With the sun rising higher in the sky, I glanced back at the forest, a sense of determination growing within me. We had fought back against the darkness, and while our fears may always linger, we would face them together, no matter what lay ahead. As we stepped onto the trail leading away from the campsite, I knew one thing for sure: we had each other, and together, we could face anything the world threw our way. And though the forest would always hold its secrets, we had taken back our power. We were free, for now.